In the middle of an emergency meeting at midnight, CEO Serafina Caldwell was seconds away from signing a billion-dollar contract when single-father janitor Archie Flynn accidentally knocked water onto her laptop. Everyone froze. The screen went dark with a sharp hiss, then flickered back to life, revealing something no one expected. A strange window displaying email screenshots, proprietary blueprints, and backup logs secretly uploading to Meridian servers. Serafina whipped around, ready to fire Archie on the spot. But he looked her straight in the eye and said, "Now, do you see why I had to do that? If Archie hadn't spilled that water, the entire technology would have been stolen. But who was he, really? And how did he know about the attack before anyone else?" Whitmore Tower rose 48 stories above Manhattan, its glass facade catching the city lights like frozen rain. On the 48th floor, the boardroom was all steel and transparency, designed to make executives feel powerful and exposed at the same time. 21 floors below, the Security Operations Center hummed with servers and monitoring screens. And 2 levels beneath the lobby, in Basement 2, sat the utility rooms where maintenance workers kept the building's arteries flowing, a world most employees never saw. The company was in the middle of what they called Security Audit Month, a phrase that made everyone nervous. But the real pressure came from somewhere else entirely. Whitmore Technologies was preparing to finalize a contract for Project Aquila, a revolutionary smart water sensor chip that could detect contaminants in real time and transmit data through the water itself. The technology was worth billions. It was also a target. Serafina Caldwell hadn't slept properly in 3 days. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in Whitmore's history, and the board never let her forget it. Chief Financial Officer Henry Dalton had been breathing down her neck all week, insisting they needed to close the Meridian deal immediately to stabilize the stock price. The pressure was suffocating, but there was something else eating at her, something she couldn't name. 2 years ago, a smaller project had leaked before launch, and she'd never figured out how. Since then, she'd become meticulous, paranoid even, double-checking every access log herself. She wore her mother's ring on her right hand, a thin silver band that reminded her of the one piece of advice her mother had given her before she died. Trust the right people, not just the powerful ones. Her wardrobe was armor. Tonight, she wore a red V-neck bodycon dress under a charcoal blazer, her blonde hair falling in waves past her shoulders. She kept blueprint drafts in an encrypted vault on the company's internal network, accessible only through biometric authentication and her personal password. She thought it was secure. She was about to learn otherwise. Archie Flynn pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the 48th floor, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished marble. At 36, he'd been working the night shift as a janitor for 3 years. Most people saw the uniform and the mop bucket and stopped looking. They didn't see the man who used to be a network security engineer, who'd once designed intrusion detection systems for a major tech firm before everything fell apart. 4 years ago, Archie had been framed by a colleague who'd stolen his credentials to cover up a security breach. The project collapsed. Archie had evidence that could have cleared his name, but using it would have meant dragging himself and his 8-year-old daughter Audrey through a years-long legal battle. He'd chosen differently. He'd walked away, taken the blame silently, and found work that let him be home when Audrey got off the school bus. Janitor work. Simple, honest, invisible. But Archie hadn't stopped being an engineer. He noticed things. He saw when network cables were improperly shielded, when smoke detectors blinked in patterns that meant faulty firmware, when access card readers logged failed attempts at odd hours. He carried a multi-tool keyring that could open most mechanical locks in the building, a microfiber cleaning cloth that doubled as an anti-static wrap, and a USB drive containing checksum verification tools that worked offline. He'd learned the hard way to never trust a network he didn't control. His daughter Audrey was brilliant in the way only 8-year-olds can be, seeing connections adults miss. She loved robotics and water science, filling their apartment with sketches of machines that turned water droplets into signal carriers. One drawing showed a single drop of water splitting light into a rainbow of data streams. Archie had pinned it to their refrigerator. He didn't know yet that it was a blueprint for the very thing Whitmore was trying to protect. Clinton Reese was Serafina's executive assistant, and he was very good at his job. Too good, some might say. At 32, he had the kind of face that made people trust him instantly, smooth and earnest, with just the right amount of concern in his eyes. He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, always ready with a solution when deadlines tightened. He had a habit of mentioning urgent timelines whenever someone questioned his requests for access, making it seem unreasonable to slow him down with protocols. In his wallet, he carried 2 building access cards. One was his official employee badge. The other was marked Visitor Contractor and had been issued 6 months ago for a vendor who'd long since completed their work. Clinton had kept it. No one had noticed. That second card had opened the vault room door 3 times in the past week, always after midnight, always when he was certain the cameras in that particular corridor were on their maintenance loop. Leo Bennett ran the IT department with an engineer's precision and a teacher's patience. He believed in process, in documentation, in making sure every system change was logged and reviewed. He was 41, wore the same blue Oxford shirt in 5 different shades, and got genuinely angry when people bypassed security protocols for convenience. Lately, he'd been losing those arguments more often than he won them. Clinton's urgent requests kept getting approved by executives who didn't want to be blamed for missing deadlines. Vivian Brooks handled public relations with the calculating eye of someone who'd survived 3 corporate scandals and learned that the cover-up was always worse than the crime. Amanda Pierce, the chief legal counsel, had the same philosophy. Both women had been warning Serafina for weeks that signing the Meridian deal before completing the security audit was legally and reputationally reckless. But Henry Dalton had the board's ear, and the board wanted quarterly numbers that made shareholders happy. The emergency meeting on the 48th floor had been going for 2 hours when Archie's cart appeared in the hallway outside the boardroom. Through the glass walls, he could see Serafina, Henry, Clinton, and Leo gathered around the conference table, documents spread out like a paper war. The Meridian Memorandum of Understanding sat in the center, waiting for a signature. Archie was mopping the corridor when he heard Serafina's voice rise sharply, warning someone to watch out. There was water on the floor. He looked up and saw her glaring at him through the glass. He nodded apologetically and moved his cart farther down the hall, but kept his mop bucket close to the door. His positioning wasn't accidental. For the past 3 nights, he'd noticed something wrong with the wireless access point near the boardroom. The activity light had been blinking in patterns that didn't match normal traffic. Earlier tonight, while checking the utility closet on this floor, he'd found fresh cable runs that weren't in any of the maintenance logs he'd quietly reviewed. Someone had installed a secondary network, and it was active right now. Inside the boardroom, Serafina's laptop sat open at the head of the table, displaying the final contract clauses. She'd set a glass of water on the table near the edge, close enough to reach when her throat got dry from talking. Too close to the edge. As it turned out, Archie moved back toward the boardroom door, timing his approach. His cartwheel caught the doorframe, jerking sideways. His hand shot out to steady it, but the motion sent his elbow into the cleaning bucket. The bucket tipped. Water sloshed out in a clear, glittering arc, and through the door that someone had left slightly ajar for air circulation. It hit Serafina's glass, which toppled forward, sending more water cascading directly onto her open laptop. The machine hissed. The screen went black. Everyone jumped up. Serafina's face went from shock to fury in the space of a heartbeat. For 3 seconds, there was only silence and the soft dripping of water onto leather chairs. Then the laptop's BIOS screen flickered to life. White text on black, running through its startup sequence. A warning appeared. Secure boot. Integrity mismatch detected. The operating system loaded anyway, and when it did, a window popped up in the center of the screen that hadn't been there before. A progress bar showing file transfer to a server labeled meridiansecure.net. Email screenshots scrolled past. Blueprint fragments. Backup logs. An upload job that had been running hidden in the background, now exposed because the sudden power loss had killed the process that kept it invisible. Serafina stared at the screen. Clinton moved immediately, his voice smooth and concerned, suggesting they needed to confiscate any unauthorized devices, perhaps starting with the janitor's USB drive. Clearly, this was sabotage. Henry demanded to know what was happening. Leo leaned closer to the laptop, his face draining of color as he read the file names being exfiltrated. Archie stood in the doorway, water still dripping from his mop, and met Serafina's eyes. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. He spoke quietly, each word deliberate. Don't sign that contract. Someone planted a back door. Your laptop's been compromised for days. Security arrived within minutes. They escorted Archie to a small office on the 47th floor, his keyring and USB drive confiscated. Serafina ordered Leo to run immediate diagnostics. Clinton urged her to stay on schedule, reminding everyone that Meridian had provided guarantees, that delays would cost millions, that they were overreacting to a technical glitch. Henry supported him, talking about stock prices and investor confidence. But something had shifted in Serafina's mind. She'd seen that progress bar. She'd seen her proprietary blueprints listed by name, and Archie Flynn, the janitor she'd barely noticed in 3 years, had looked at her without fear or deference and told her not to sign. She told Henry and Clinton to wait, then followed Leo to the Security Operations Center on the 21st floor. The room was dark except for the glow of monitors, screens displaying network traffic flows, server status panels, access logs scrolling past like digital waterfalls. Leo's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up forensic data. The hash values didn't match. The files stored in Serafina's encrypted vault and the files that had been open on her laptop weren't identical. Someone had modified them. The access logs showed entries outside business hours, timestamps that coincided with building security card scans. The card ID wasn't Serafina's. It wasn't Leo's. It was registered to a contractor credential that should have been deactivated months ago. Leo kept digging. He found an agent running on Serafina's machine, disguised as a touchpad driver update. It had been creating an encrypted tunnel through the guest Wi-Fi network, bypassing the corporate firewall entirely. The command and control server it connected to resolved to meridiansecure.net, the same address shown in the upload window. 2 floors below, Archie sat in the holding room, thinking about his daughter and how he'd promised her he'd always do clean work, honest work. He'd kept that promise for 3 years. Tonight, he'd broken a different rule. The rule that said invisible people should stay invisible. He wondered if it had been worth it. His USB drive sat in an evidence bag on the desk. Inside that drive was a bootable Linux environment and a checksum verification tool he'd written years ago. 3 nights ago, he'd seen Clinton entering the server room during a routine cleaning round. Clinton had been carrying a tablet and looking nervous. Archie, curious and cautious after years of watching systems fail because someone skipped a step, had made a backup copy of certain system files before the nightly automated backup ran. It wasn't procedure. It was instinct. The door opened. Serafina walked in, followed by Leo. She was still wearing the red dress, but she'd lost the blazer somewhere, and her expression had shifted from anger to something more complex. She sat down across from Archie. "Explain," she said. Archie told her about the wireless access point, about the unauthorized cable runs, about the strange traffic patterns he'd noticed for a week. He told her that her laptop had been tunneling data through the guest network, that the sudden power loss from the water had killed the encryption process, exposing what was underneath. He told her that if she'd signed that contract tonight, Meridian would have had complete copies of Project Aquila's blueprints before the ink dried, and Whitmore would have lost the patent race before they even knew they were in one. Serafina's hand moved unconsciously to her mother's ring, spinning it slowly around her finger. She studied Archie's face, looking for deception, and finding only tired honesty. "You could have just told someone," she said. "I tried. 3 days ago, I mentioned weird network activity to a supervisor. He said janitors don't give tech advice. Yesterday, I left a note for IT. It went unanswered. Tonight, I saw the meeting through the glass and knew I was out of time. So, I made a choice. Cut the connection the only way I could." Leo had been running more checks during this conversation. Now he looked up, his expression grim. He's right. The exfiltration job was nearly complete. Another 10 minutes, and they'd have had everything. Serafina stood, paced to the window, looked out at the city lights, reflected in the glass like scattered diamonds. Her company. Her responsibility. Her near-catastrophic mistake. She'd been so focused on the pressure from above that she'd stopped trusting her own instincts, and she'd almost been destroyed by someone she'd trusted implicitly. She turned back to Archie. "I need you to help us fix this." "Why would you trust me?" Archie asked. "Because you stopped an upload instead of starting one. Because you had 3 years to steal anything you wanted, And you spent that time fixing broken lights and reporting fire hazards. Because... She paused. The admission difficult. Because I've spent 2 years trusting the wrong person. And maybe it's time I tried trusting the right one. She told Leo to restore Archie's access. To give him whatever he needed. Leo hesitated only a moment before nodding. This was beyond protocol now. This was triage. The next 6 hours were a controlled catastrophe. Leo's team discovered that the modified files had been accessed 17 times using Clinton's secondary badge. The metadata timestamps matched perfectly with security logs showing late-night building access. The exfiltration agent had been installed during a routine update that Clinton had personally volunteered to handle, citing his efficiency. When confronted, Clinton remained calm. He explained that Meridian had asked for demonstration files to verify integration capabilities. It was standard vendor practice. He'd been trying to help expedite the deal. Henry backed him up, desperate to keep the contract on track. But Archie had one more piece of evidence. From his USB drive, he produced checksum comparisons between the Vault's master files and the versions that had been modified. The alterations weren't just copies. Someone had embedded additional metadata. Microscopic changes that would have given Meridian proof of prior invention if any patent disputes arose. It was sophisticated theft disguised as legitimate cooperation. Amanda Pierce, the legal counsel, recognized the implications immediately. If they'd signed tonight, they would have handed over not just technology, but legal ammunition for their competitors. The potential lawsuit damages would have bankrupted the company. News of the breach began leaking before dawn, appearing on industry blogs that specialized in corporate espionage stories. Someone had tipped them off, probably trying to force Whitmore's hand. Vivian Brooks convened an emergency public relations meeting, her expression grim. The stock market would open in 3 hours. They needed a statement. The board of directors demanded an explanation. Henry Dalton, feeling the foundation crumbling beneath his feet, suggested suspending Serafina temporarily to reassure investors. It was political survival instinct. Throwing someone overboard to lighten the ship. Half the board nodded agreement. Serafina stood in front of them all, her voice steady despite the exhaustion and betrayal. She explained what had happened, accepted responsibility for not catching it sooner, then presented the evidence that proved deliberate sabotage. She announced that the Meridian deal was suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation, that all external network access was being locked down, that the Aquila servers were being air-gapped until they could verify clean backups. Henry tried to interrupt, to argue about market consequences. Serafina cut him off. We'll survive a stock dip. We won't survive losing our core technology and spending the next decade in litigation. The deal is dead, until we're certain our house is clean. But evidence alone wasn't enough to stop the damage. They needed to identify everyone involved and seal every possible leak. Archie suggested a trap, something that would force the remaining conspirators into the open. It was risky. It required Serafina to trust him completely. She thought about her mother's ring, about trust and intuition and the cost of getting it wrong. She gave the order to proceed. While they were planning the counter-operation, Clinton made his own move. Realizing that the investigation was closing in, he activated a wiper program designed to erase evidence from the compromised servers. But the wiper was aggressive, overwriting data at a rate that generated massive heat in the RAID array. Cooling systems struggled to compensate. In the server room on the 21st floor, temperature alarms began shrieking. A spark jumped from an overloaded power supply to a cable bundle. Smoke detectors should have triggered instantly. They didn't. Someone had adjusted their sensitivity threshold during a routine maintenance check weeks ago, buying precious seconds of delay. By the time the fire suppression system activated, smoke was already pouring into the hallway. Serafina was in the security operations center when the alarms hit. She ran toward the server room, thinking only about the backup drives that held the clean copies of Aquila. The electronic locks had defaulted to secure mode, sealing the fire inside, but also trapping anyone who might be in there. She yanked on the door, but it didn't move. Archie appeared beside her with his keyring and multi-tool. Years of maintaining building infrastructure had taught him the manual overrides for every system. He popped the emergency release cover, bypassed the electronic lock with a mechanical lever, and hauled the door open. Heat and smoke billowed out. "Stay back," he ordered, but Serafina was already moving past him, heading for the backup drive cage. Sprinklers erupted overhead, drenching everything. Archie grabbed her arm, pulled her toward a specific server rack. Not the main Aquila storage that was already corrupted by the wiper, but the parity drive that Leo's team kept as a last resort failsafe. Archie had noticed it during his cleaning rounds, had seen the red survivor label on the chassis. They pulled the drive free, water streaming down their faces, smoke stinging their eyes. Leo appeared in the doorway, shouting for them to get out. The three of them stumbled into the hallway as the fire suppression foam deployed behind them, smothering what remained of the flames. In the stairwell, soaked and coughing, Serafina looked at the parity drive in Archie's hands like it was the Holy Grail. Then she looked at him, at the man who'd just saved her life and her company's future. Something shifted in her expression. The final wall of professional distance crumbling. "Tell me what to do," she said quietly. Archie laid out the plan with the methodical calm of someone who'd spent years thinking through failure scenarios. They'd use his offline USB environment to boot a clean operating system, mount the parity drive in read-only mode, extract a time-stamped metadata timeline that would show exactly who'd accessed what and when. They'd call in Dante Morrison from the cybercrime unit to ensure everything was legally documented. They'd have Vivian stall the press for another 24 hours. They'd have Amanda prepare injunctions against Meridian if the evidence confirmed their complicity. And they'd set one final trap. They'd create a honeypot file labeled Aquila version 2 final integration specs, embed it with invisible tracking pixels and DNS canaries that would phone home the instant someone opened it anywhere in the world, then grant Clinton temporary access to the vault under the guise of helping with disaster recovery. If he took the bait, they'd have proof of active data theft with full legal standing. Serafina listened, then nodded. "Do it." While Leo worked on the technical setup, Serafina asked Archie the question that had been building in her mind. "Why are you here? Why work as a janitor when you can do this?" Archie told her about the old project, about being betrayed, about choosing his daughter over his career, about the promise he'd made to Audrey that he'd only do clean work, honest work, work that let him sleep at night, about how invisible jobs had their own kind of power, because people said things in front of janitors they'd never say in front of engineers. "I told my daughter I'd always do what's right, even when it's hard," he said. "She's 8. She draws pictures of water droplets carrying information. She doesn't know her father used to build the systems that protect that kind of technology. I wanted her to know me as someone who kept his promises, not someone who fought dirty and won." For the first time in 3 years, Serafina felt the weight of her mother's ring as something other than a burden. Trust the right people. She'd been trusting credentials and titles and polished presentations. She'd forgotten to trust instinct and integrity. That evening, she drove to Archie's apartment in Queens, a modest building with good light and a playground across the street. Audrey answered the door, wearing a t-shirt with a robot on it, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail. Behind her, the walls were covered with sketches and diagrams, a child's vision of science and possibility. One drawing caught Serafina's eye. A single water droplet splitting into 7 streams of light, each stream carrying tiny packets of data. At the bottom, in careful crayon letters, Audrey had written, "Water talks if you listen." "You drew this?" Serafina asked. Audrey nodded, suddenly shy. "My dad says water can carry secrets. He says everything leaves a trace." Serafina knelt down to Audrey's level. "Your dad is right, and he just saved my company by paying attention to those traces." Later, after Audrey had gone to bed, Serafina and Archie sat in the small kitchen with coffee and exhaustion. She apologized for doubting him, for nearly having him arrested, for 3 years of not seeing him at all. He accepted the apology with quiet grace, then surprised her by apologizing back, for not finding a better way to warn her, for the chaos his choice had caused. "I need you to lead the security rebuild," Serafina said. "Not as a consultant, as head of cyber resilience. Full authority, full team, whatever budget you need. We're going to redesign everything around the principle that every data path needs a canary, a way to know if it's been compromised. Water-themed security architecture. Your daughter's idea, actually. Every secret leaves a trace." Archie hesitated. He had Audrey to think about, routines that mattered, a promise about staying clean. Serafina saw the conflict and made an offer she'd never made before. Flexible schedule, remote work when needed, and a full STEM scholarship fund for Audrey starting immediately. Not a bribe. An investment in the future. I need people I can trust, Serafina said. People who'll tell me the truth, even when it's inconvenient. People who understand that protecting something means being willing to break it before someone else does. You spent 3 years invisible, watching everything. Now I need you visible. Building something that can't be broken the same way twice. The trap closed 2 days later. Clinton, believing he'd successfully misdirected suspicion toward vendor integration issues, logged into the vault using his emergency recovery credentials. He downloaded the Aquila version 2 honeypot file, transferred it to an encrypted personal drive, then forwarded it through an anonymizing service to an email address registered to Oliver Grant, CEO of Meridian Technologies. The DNS canary triggered within 8 minutes. The tracking pixels reported their location. A server farm outside Philadelphia. Registered to a Meridian subsidiary. The file had been opened, copied, and distributed to 3 internal recipients at Meridian's development lab. Dante Morrison's cybercrime unit had been monitoring everything from a mobile operations center parked 2 blocks from Whitmore Tower. They coordinated with the FBI's Intellectual Property Division. Warrants were executed simultaneously at Meridian's headquarters and Clinton's apartment. The confrontation happened in Serafina's office, Clinton standing between 2 federal agents while Archie displayed the evidence on a wall-mounted screen. Transfer logs with MAC, addresses matching Clinton's devices. Timestamps, correlating with his building access. Email metadata, showing correspondence with Oliver Grant, dating back 11 months. Financial records showing deposits to an offshore account, opened the week after Project Aquila's first prototype succeeded. Clinton tried one final deflection, claiming Archie had fabricated the evidence that janitors don't have the expertise to coordinate something this sophisticated. Archie responded by walking through every piece of technical proof: the hash chain verification, the TLS handshake anomalies, the timing correlation between Clinton's badge swipes, and the file modification timestamps. Each explanation was precise, methodical, and completely damning. Serafina watched Clinton being escorted out in handcuffs. This man she'd trusted with her schedule, her passwords, her vulnerabilities. She felt hollowed out by the betrayal, but also strangely clear. She'd been so afraid of trusting the wrong person that she'd stopped trusting her own instincts. Archie had forced her to look at what was actually happening, instead of what she wanted to believe. Federal prosecutors charged Clinton with corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and wire fraud. Meridian Technologies faced civil litigation for receiving stolen intellectual property with knowledge of its illegal acquisition. Oliver Grant resigned within a week, citing health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Discovery would be brutal. Amanda Pierce coordinated the legal response, with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for this fight. Vivian Brooks managed the public narrative, transforming what could have been a catastrophic leak into a story of swift justice and internal vigilance. The stock took a hit initially, then recovered when Whitmore announced a complete security overhaul and named Archie Flynn as head of cyber resilience, a newly created executive position. Henry Dalton apologized to Serafina privately, admitting that his pressure to close the deal had been about covering his own failures rather than serving the company's interests. He offered his resignation. Serafina accepted it. The board of directors, chastened by how close they'd come to disaster, gave Serafina full authority to rebuild the security infrastructure however she saw fit. No more shortcuts, no more bypassing protocols for convenience. The company would heal properly, or not at all. Archie's first initiative was exactly what he'd promised. Water-themed security architecture, where every data flow contained traceable markers, where anomalies triggered alerts, where trust was verified continuously rather than assumed eternally. He hired Leo as deputy director and brought in Dante Morrison as an external advisor. He built a team of people who understood that security wasn't about perfect prevention. It was about knowing when you'd been compromised and responding before the damage became irreparable. 1 year later, Project Aquila launched successfully. Its smart water sensors revolutionizing infrastructure monitoring across 6 continents. Whitmore Technologies became a case study in corporate resilience, featured in business schools as an example of how to survive catastrophic betrayal and emerge stronger. The annual security conference was held in the same 48th floor boardroom where everything had started. Archie presented the new architecture to industry leaders, explaining how continuous verification and transparent logging had reduced successful intrusions to zero. Audrey, now 9 and increasingly comfortable with public speaking, demonstrated a prototype water signal robot that could detect anomalies in fluid networks and transmit warnings through the water itself. Serafina watched from the side of the room, no longer in the red dress and armor, but in simple professional attire that suggested confidence without needing to perform it. She'd learned to trust her team, to admit uncertainty, to value competence over charisma. The company was different now. She was different. After the presentation, when the guests had left and the caterers were cleaning up, Serafina found Archie on the rooftop terrace. Manhattan stretched out below them, a galaxy of lights reflected in glass towers, the city looking almost liquid in the evening haze. "You know," Serafina said, leaning against the railing, "that night, when you spilled water on my laptop, I was ready to destroy you." "I know," Archie said quietly. "I was ready to be destroyed. But not before stopping the theft. You saved everything by breaking everything." She turned to look at him, this man who'd spent 3 years invisible, who'd sacrificed his career for his daughter, who'd risked the little he had left to do the right thing. That laptop was $8,000, by the way. The company we almost lost was worth $800 million. Best return on investment we've ever had. Archie smiled slightly. "Your insurance covered the laptop." "I checked." "Of course you did." She laughed, surprising herself. The ring on her finger caught the light. She'd been wearing it the night everything changed, had been touching it when she'd made the decision to trust him. Trust the right people. "My mother left me this ring. She said it would help me know who to believe." I didn't understand what she meant until I met someone who'd rather be wrong and honest than right and corrupt. The first drops of rain began to fall, light and warm, speckling the pavement with dark stars. Neither of them moved to go inside. The rain intensified slightly, and Serafina closed her eyes, feeling it wash away the last residue of the person she'd been before that midnight meeting. "Sometimes," Archie said softly, "you have to cut the power to see what's really running. Water does that. Stops everything. Exposes everything. Cleans everything." "Is that what you told Audrey?" Serafina asked. "I told her that water carries truth, that you can't hide anything from something that flows everywhere and remembers everything." She understood it better than I did. Kids usually do. They stood together in the rain, CEO and security chief, 2 people who'd been strangers a year ago, now bound by crisis and reconstruction and the strange intimacy of shared survival. Below them, the city glittered through the rainfall, like a million promises reflected in a million windows. Serafina thought about that night, about the moment everything had shattered and reassembled into something stronger, about the choice Archie had made, knowing it might cost him everything, about the choice she'd made to believe him despite every instinct screaming caution. "You spilled water on my laptop," she said, "and saved my future." "Sometimes," Archie replied, "that's what it takes. You have to turn everything off to see what matters." The rain fell harder, washing the city clean, and somewhere below them, in an apartment in Queens, a 9-year-old girl was drawing another water droplet, splitting light into data, imagining the next impossible thing that adults would eventually build. The future was being sketched in crayon, protected by people who understood that trust wasn't a weakness, but a foundation, that security wasn't about walls, but about knowing when something had breached them, that sometimes salvation came from the places you weren't looking. Serafina reached out and took Archie's hand. Not romantically, but in recognition. 2 people who'd learned the same hard lesson from opposite directions, that power without trust is brittle, that visibility without integrity is hollow, that the right person in the right moment can change everything. They stood there until the rain eased, until the city shimmered clear again, until the water ran off the glass towers and pooled in the streets below, carrying its cargo of reflected light towards storm drains and rivers, and eventually the ocean, where everything dissolved and reformed and began again. Just like trust, just like truth, just like the company they'd rebuilt together, one careful drop at a time.